Lydia Mercer set the engagement flowers on the table, looked Henry Wycliffe in the eye, and said, "I believe you have proposed to the wrong woman." He had just promised her freedom from her printing workshop, as though the life she had spent 6 years building was something she needed rescuing from. 12 men, 12 proposals, 12 versions of the same sentence dressed in different clothes. If you've ever built something with your own hands and watched someone call it a burden, stay with this story. Subscribe to our channel and drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far Lydia's story travels. Henry Wycliffe had been speaking for 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Lydia knew because she had been counting, not obviously. Not with any visible impatience. She stood with her hands folded in front of her. Her expression composed, her posture exactly what 300 guests on the other side of that library wall would have expected from a woman receiving what London considered to be a very fine offer from a very suitable man. Henry was describing the house in Mayfair, then the carriages, then the summer travel, then the security — he used that word twice, which told her something, then the freedom from financial worry. He was thorough. She would give him that. And then he reached the part they always reached. "Once we're married," Henry said, with the warm confidence of a man who considers a thing settled before the other party has agreed, "you won't have to trouble yourself with that little printing concern anymore." The room went very quiet. Not the whole room. The ballroom on the other side of the wall was still roaring with music and 300 people and the cheerful noise of London society entertaining itself. But the library went quiet, in the way that happens when one person in a conversation stops breathing quite normally. That person was not Henry. Lydia looked at him. She did not move. She did not blink more than usual, but something behind her eyes changed. The way the surface of water changes in the moment before something heavy drops into it. "If I wish to continue," she asked. Henry laughed. It was a gentle laugh, a patient laugh. Laugh of a man who is certain the woman across from him is making a small joke and wants to show he appreciates her humor. "Lydia," he said, using her given name with the easy warmth of a man who had already written the ending of this conversation in his head. "You won't need to. That is rather the point." She looked at the flowers he had pressed into her hands when she walked through the door. Garden roses, white, carefully tied, the gesture of a man who had asked someone what women liked and followed the advice to the letter. She set them on the table, not dropped, set with precision, without drama, with the particular care of someone placing something in its permanent location. "Then I believe," Lydia said, "that you have proposed to the wrong woman." Henry blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "The woman you have described." She smoothed her left glove with 2 fingers. "Unhurried. She sounds entirely pleasant. She would manage your house very well and be grateful for the carriages and smile beautifully at the continent. I have no doubt she exists somewhere in this city tonight." Lydia looked toward the library door. "She is simply not me. Miss Mercer," she said. Still without heat. Something moved across Henry's face. The warmth didn't disappear so much as slide, revealing what had been underneath it all along: not cruelty, not rage, but the sharp and particular frustration of a man who had done the arithmetic correctly and arrived at an answer that shouldn't be wrong. "You are 28 years old," he said. "Do you understand what people in that room say about you?" "Frequently," Lydia said. "And usually while I am standing within earshot. 12 men." "Miss Mercer." "Yes, 12 serious proposals. Do you not find it?" Lydia said. "I was going to say alarming." She held his gaze. "I find it clarifying. Every man I have spoken with has described a version of my life from which I am largely absent. You have done the same." The flowers were lovely. She turned toward the door. "I wish you well. You will regret this." His voice had gone flat in a way that told her he believed it. "You are not as young as you imagine yourself to be. And this city has a long memory." Lydia paused with her hand on the door. She did not turn around. "Then give it something accurate to remember," she said, and opened the door. The music hit her first, then the light. Then the 300 pairs of eyes that had been pretending. with varying degrees of commitment, not to watch the library door for the past 11 minutes. They saw Henry Wycliffe standing alone among the bookshelves with the white roses abandoned on the table beside him. They saw Lydia Mercer step into the ballroom. She did not hurry. She did not look back. She did not vary her pace by a single step from what it would have been if she were crossing a room in her own house. On an ordinary evening, with nowhere particular to be. She walked toward the far door with the unhurried certainty of someone who has concluded a piece of business and is ready for the next thing. The whispers started before she was halfway across the room. 12 men, 12 refusals. A woman near the bench table said she was impossible. A man near the window said she was unnatural. Someone in yellow silk murmured to the man beside her that Lydia Mercer had priced herself entirely out of the market and would end her days surrounded by paper and ink, which was perhaps what she deserved. Nathaniel Caldwell heard all of it. He was standing near the east wall. Not because the east wall was socially advantageous, it wasn't, but because it was the farthest point from the dancing that still technically qualified as being in the room. He had come tonight because his solicitor had told him the Ashbourne title required a social presence, and he had run out of legitimate objections. He was working through a brandy he didn't particularly want, and trying to remember why he had agreed to this. Then the library door opened. He watched Lydia Mercer cross the ballroom. Not because she was beautiful, though she was not in the obvious, arranged way that London valued, but in the way of someone who had stopped thinking about whether they were beautiful and replaced that concern with something more useful. He watched because of the walk, because of what it wasn't. It wasn't triumph, it wasn't defiance, it wasn't the performance of a woman making a statement. It was someone walking toward a door because they had somewhere more important to be. He watched her go through it and stood with his brandy and filed the whole thing in the part of his mind that he reserved for things that didn't yet make sense. The carriage was quiet. Lydia pressed both hands flat against her face and held them there. 6 seconds. She allowed herself exactly 6 seconds. Then she dropped her hands, straightened her back, and opened her reticule. The letter from Hargrove and Sons was folded in quarters. She had received it that afternoon, read it twice, and put it away because she needed to think, and she had not yet had time to think. She unfolded it now in the dim light of the moving carriage. Polite, brief, absolute. They were terminating their supply contract with Mercer House, effective in 30 days due to a change in their commercial arrangements. They wished her every success. 6 weeks before this, she had lost Alderton paper, smaller, easily replaced. She had replaced them within a fortnight and thought nothing more of it. Hargrove was different. Hargrove had been reliable for 3 years. Affordable, never a moment of difficulty. And now they were gone with a letter that explained nothing except that someone had made them a better offer, or applied some pressure she couldn't see from the outside. She folded the letter and looked at the window. 30 days to find a new primary supplier, while simultaneously fulfilling 6 active commercial contracts and managing 3 women at the press room, who she knew were already asking Beatrice the questions they were too careful to ask her directly. She did not let herself think about what it meant if she couldn't solve it. She thought instead about what she needed to do first. Mercer House was already running when she arrived the next morning. She heard it before she was through the door, the particular rhythm of the presses. The voices, the movement of a place that had learned to function without waiting to be told. That sound was the thing she had built, not the building, not the contracts, not the ledgers, the sound of women working without apology. Beatrice was at the long table with 3 order books open and her reading spectacles pushed up on her forehead, which meant she had been there at least 2 hours and had moved past the point of needing them. The Hargrove shipment didn't come, Beatrice said. Before Lydia reached the table. I know. I got the letter yesterday afternoon. The wits know something is wrong. Beatrice did not look up from the order books. Helen asked me last night whether we were in trouble. Mary asked me this morning. I told them both that you were handling it. Lydia set her bag down. I am handling it, I know you are. Now Beatrice looked up. Her eyes were direct and not unkind, which was Beatrice's particular version of concern. But they're not wrong that something is wrong, and we both know it. And I'd like to know how wrong before I decide what to tell them. You told them I was handling it. I told them that because I believe it. I'd like to keep believing it. Beatrice pushed one of the order books across the table. We have 6 weeks of paper in stock. If we ration by prioritizing the commercial ledger orders and pushing the primer printing to the back half of the schedule, we can extend that to 8. After that, we are producing nothing. Lydia looked at the numbers. She had run them herself the night before and arrived at the same calculation. 8 weeks if they were careful. 8 weeks to find a supplier, negotiate terms, arrange delivery, and keep 6 commercial clients from noticing any disruption. This is the second supplier in 2 months, Beatrice said. Yes, Alderton before that, yes. Beatrice was quiet for a moment. Outside, one of the presses started up a sound like a slow heartbeat. Steady and deliberate. Then she said, Lydia, that is not bad luck. No. Lydia closed the order book. It is not. Lydia met her eyes. I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. Beatrice held her gaze. Then, and this was the thing about Beatrice, the thing that made her irreplaceable, she nodded once, picked up her spectacles, and put them back on, not because she was satisfied. Because she had decided that the argument she could have right now was less useful than the work that needed doing. Helen's primer order needs to go out by Thursday, she said. You'll want to check the binding on the last signature. Lydia picked up her bag and went to check the binding. She was 3 steps away when Beatrice spoke again. You should tell them, Beatrice said. The women. Not everything, but something. They're not fragile. Lydia, they've survived worse than a paper shortage. Treating them like they need protecting from the truth is not the same as protecting them. Lydia stopped. She did not turn around. If I tell them and I cannot fix it, if you don't tell them and they figure it out from the outside, they will never trust this place the same way again. Beatrice's voice was not raised. It didn't need to be. They chose to come here. Let them choose whether to stay. The press ran its steady rhythm in the next room. Lydia stood still for a moment. Then she said, let me find out what we're actually dealing with first. Then we'll talk to them together. Beatrice said nothing. Which from Beatrice meant, I disagree, but I'll give you the time you've asked for. Lydia went to check the binding. It was Lady Forsyth's exhibition of maps and illuminated manuscripts where Lydia first actually spoke to him. She was examining a 16th century atlas old coastlines. The names of countries that no longer existed, spelled out in careful ink. And in the margins where the cartographers had run out of knowledge. Sea monsters drawn with unexpected tenderness, as though whoever made the map had decided that imagination deserved as much care as fact. They never knew what to do with the blank parts, said a voice to her left. She did not startle. She turned. He was standing close enough to see the same page she was looking at. Far enough that it wasn't intrusive. Tall, dressed with the kind of precision that said someone had put care into it without wanting to be caught caring. The face of someone who had learned to watch more than he spoke, and who had been watching for long enough that the habit had settled into his features permanently. She had seen him at the Forsyth ball. She had heard his name in the 3 days since. That was rather the purpose of the sea monsters, she said. Better a monster than a public admission of ignorance. Some would argue they are the same thing. Some would be right. She turned back to the map. You are the Duke of Ashbourne. I am. You are Miss Mercer, I am. I was at the Forsyth ball 3 nights ago, he said. Most of London was. I heard what was said about you afterward. Lydia looked at him directly. Men who brought up the ball generally did so to offer her one of 2 things. A lecture about pride, or an unconvincing assurance that they personally found her interesting precisely because of it. Either way, did you? She said. I thought it sounded like it went rather well, he said. For you. She studied him. Most people describe it differently. Most people were watching Henry Wycliffe. I was watching you. He turned a page in the exhibition catalog. I was watching to see whether you looked back. Did I? He said it without emphasis. That told me something. What did it tell you? That the library was not the point of your evening. Whatever you were actually thinking about, when you crossed that room, it was not Henry Wycliffe. Lydia was quiet. Nobody had said that. In 3 days of whispers and social commentary and Maggie asking careful questions over breakfast, nobody had said that. You do not open with flattery, she said. Flattery is for situations where I am not certain I am right. He closed the catalog. This is not one of those. That is either very perceptive or very arrogant. I've been told those can be difficult to distinguish. He paused. I am not going to propose to you, Miss Mercer. Something shifted in her expression. Not relief. She examined it afterward, and it was definitely not relief. Surprise, perhaps. The small jolt of encountering something you had not prepared a response for. Is that an announcement? An assurance? I have been at enough of these gatherings to know that the fastest way to make you leave a room is to reach into my jacket and produce a ring. I have no such intention. He looked at the sea monsters with apparent calm. I simply wanted to know what you were actually thinking about. You wanted to know. 12 men, apparently, have each failed to ask you a worthwhile question. It seemed like a waste. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, a paper supply contract. He turned his head slightly. I beg your pardon? You asked what I was thinking about. I was thinking about a paper supply contract. My primary supplier terminated our arrangement 30 days ago. Without explanation, beyond changed commercial arrangements. And it is the second supplier I have lost in 2 months. She had not intended to say that. She had intended to say something vague and move on. She was not certain, afterward, what had made her say the true thing instead. Nathaniel looked at her with an expression that was not pity and not patronizing interest. It was the expression of someone doing arithmetic. 2 suppliers in 2 months, he said, both citing changed commercial arrangements. Yes, do you know who their new arrangements are with? I am working on finding that out. That is not bad luck, he said. No, Lydia said, it is not. He held her gaze. Do you have people looking into the connection? And there it was. Small. Almost nothing. But she caught at the slight forward lean in how he asked. The instinct of a man whose first thought when encountering a problem was to reach for a solution before anyone had asked him to. I do, she said, and her voice was level and clear. I have been working on this since before the first letter arrived. Your Grace, I am not asking for assistance. I am answering your question. He stopped. He recognized it. She could see that he recognized it, and something moved across his face that was not quite embarrassment, but was its more disciplined cousin. You're right, he said simply. Forgive me. She studied him. Most men corrected, either apologized too much or retreated behind defense. He did neither. He simply adjusted. The question was still a good one, she said. After a moment. I don't yet know who the new arrangements are with. That is what I am trying to determine. He nodded. If I am able to find anything through my own commercial connections with your permission, I will bring it to you, and you can decide what to do with it. Lydia looked at him. With your permission, he said again, and it was not performance. He meant it as a specific and deliberate choice of words. We will see, she said. He accepted that without argument. Good evening, Miss Mercer. He walked away without looking back, which she noticed, because she noticed everything. She stood in front of the sea monster map for a long time. The card arrived on Thursday. Nathaniel Caldwell, Duke of Ashbourne, and beneath it, in handwriting that was direct and economical, I have found something relevant to your supply problem. At your convenience, no obligation. No request for reply if you prefer not. Maggie set it on the desk and waited. Lydia read it twice. He said he would look into it. Did you think he wouldn't? I thought it was possible he would decide the matter was beneath his attention, and instead he sent a card that says no obligation and no reply required. Maggie folded her hands. That is a man who understands that you might not want to be approached, or a man who is very good at appearing to understand it. Those are two different things, Maggie said. Though they often look the same at the beginning. Lydia put the card down, picked up her pen. Put it down. Tell him Friday morning. Here. 9 o'clock. He arrived at 9 exactly and brought a folder and nothing else. No solicitor, no attendant hovering at a respectful distance. He sat in the chair she indicated, placed the folder on the table between them with the precise neutrality of someone presenting evidence rather than a gift, and said, I should tell you up front that I did this without your explicit permission. And you may be annoyed. Tell me what you found, Lydia said. He opened the folder. The documents were not dramatic. They were commercial records, contract registrations, company affiliations, the dry public paper of business conducted in the open, where no one bothered to look because it was too boring to be suspicious. He had traced the new arrangements of both terminated suppliers through 3 layers of intermediary, and found a single name appearing at the center of both. Warren Prescott. Lydia read the name and something went cold and absolutely still in her chest. You know him, Nathaniel said. He proposed to me 14 months ago. She kept her voice entirely even. I declined. He was very polite about it. She read the name again. He told me he admired my independence. Nathaniel waited. The building Mercer House occupies, Lydia said. The district has changed in the past 2 years. New roads planned. Commercial development moving east. She turned the page. It is worth considerably more than when I signed the lease. If the workshop becomes untenable, Nathaniel said. You sell or relocate. The property becomes available, and Warren purchases it at the price of someone who has just had a very difficult 6 months. She closed the folder. The coldness in her chest had not become anger yet. It was still just cold. He never wanted me. He wanted the building. Marriage would have been the tidiest route to both. And when I declined, he found a longer road. She looked at him. Business associates. People who track commercial filings. None of it is secret, it's all public record, but it requires the right questions and access to the right registrations. And you thought to look because I recognized what you described at the exhibition. 2 suppliers in 2 months is a pattern. Patterns have sources, he paused. Then also, you had the look of someone carrying considerably more weight than a single lost contract. Is that what I looked like? It is what I recognized, he said, with a slight correction in his tone. My brother died without warning 14 months ago. I was managing a commercial operation in New York when it happened. I came back to England and found an estate, a title, and a set of obligations I had not chosen, and no one around me who understood what it cost to absorb it without saying so. He was quiet a moment. I know what it looks like when someone is holding something they haven't told anyone the full weight of. I am not saying it to flatter you. I am saying it because it is accurate. Lydia looked at him. This was the thing she had not expected. Not the intelligence. Not the usefulness of the folder. The accuracy. He has 30 days before he realizes the supply pressure alone isn't sufficient, she said. Yes. After which he will try another lever. I need to know what levers he has. Nathaniel reached into the folder and produced a second page she had not yet seen. His financial position. His property holdings, his known business relationship. I cannot tell you what he will do next, but you can see what he has available to do it with. She took the page. She read it carefully. He waited without impatience, without filling the silence with unnecessary sound, which she was beginning to understand was one of his particular qualities, the ability to wait without performing waiting. When she looked up, you almost offered a solution just now. He stilled. When you handed me the page, she said, you stopped yourself. I saw you stop. Yes. What were you about to say? He considered that. Then, with the directness she was beginning to expect from him, I was about to suggest that I could purchase a stake in one of his supplier relationships and apply counter-pressure. Quietly, without his knowing the source, Lydia looked at him. And then I remembered what you said at the exhibition, he said. That you were not asking for assistance. I said I was answering your question. Yes. But the meaning was clear. She set the page down. She looked at him steadily. What you were about to suggest would have meant making a significant financial move in a situation that is mine to manage. Without asking whether I wanted you to, because you had decided it was the correct solution. Yes, he said. That is exactly what it would have meant. And you stopped. I stopped. He held her gaze. I would like to say I stopped because I had thought it through carefully beforehand. The truth is, I stopped because you were looking at me and I realized, in that particular moment, that I was about to become exactly what you have spent 12 proposals refusing. The room was quiet. Outside, London was doing what London always did, moving. Noisy, entirely indifferent. The page is useful, Lydia said, finally. The folder is useful. You have my genuine thanks. I will decide what to do with it. I know you will, she met his eyes. And if I determine that I need someone to make inquiries into his supplier relationships, you will ask, Nathaniel said. And I will answer yes or no based on what you tell me. And then you will direct how it is done. Lydia was quiet for a moment. Then, that is a surprisingly specific understanding of how this ought to work. I spent 3 years in American commercial environments, he said. Watching men with significant power destroy potentially excellent partnerships because they could not stop themselves from taking over. I learned the lesson from other people's mistakes, which is the preferable way to learn it. Something that was nearly a smile moved across her face. She picked up the second page. She looked at Warren Prescott's financial position, his holdings, his relationships. She began to see the shape of what was coming. Good morning, Your Grace, she said, not looking up. He stood, collected his hat from the side table, and walked to the door. Miss Mercer, he said. He left. Lydia sat with the documents spread on the table in front of her and thought about Warren Prescott, who had proposed with a smile and a compliment about her independence, and then gone home and begun quietly removing the ground from under her feet. She thought about Beatrice saying, "They're not fragile." Lydia. She thought about the women at the presses and what 8 weeks meant and what happened in the 9th. She thought briefly, and with more attention than she intended, about a man who had stopped himself mid-sentence because he had recognized what he was about to become. Then she moved the folder to her left, opened her ledger, and began working on the problem the only way she knew how, with her own hands. Her own numbers, and the very clear understanding that no one was going to solve this for her. She wasn't looking for rescue, but she was beginning to understand that there was a difference between rescue and someone who brought you the map and stepped back and let you read it yourself. That difference, she thought, might matter. She turned the page and kept working. The documents sat on Lydia's table for 2 days before she acted on them. Not because she was afraid, because she was precise. Lydia Mercer had learned early that the difference between a good decision and a ruinous one was rarely intelligence, it was timing. You moved when you understood the full shape of what you were moving against. Not before. She spent those 2 days mapping Warren Prescott's financial reach. She cross-referenced the supplier contracts with property records she pulled from the county registry herself. She wrote 3 letters, one to a solicitor she trusted in Boston who understood American commercial law, one to a printer contact in Edinburgh who might know alternative paper sources, one to a business colleague who owed her a professional courtesy and had never yet been asked to pay it. Then she went to Mercer House on the 3rd morning and told the women the truth. Not all of it, but enough. She stood in the press room with the machines quiet for the first time since she could remember. And she looked at the 7 women who had built their lives inside these walls. And she told them that someone was applying pressure to their suppliers and that she was working to resolve it and that she needed them to know. The silence that followed was not the silence of panic. It was the silence of people recalibrating. Helen spoke first. She was 43, had been at the presses for 2 years, and had a directness that Lydia had always respected. "Are we going to close?" "No," Lydia said. "Are you certain or are you hoping?" The room waited. "Both," Lydia said. "I am certain of what I intend. I am hoping the circumstances cooperate." "That is the honest answer." Helen nodded slowly. Then she picked up her apron from the hook beside her and tied it on. "Then I suppose we'd better make sure the Thursday order goes out without a single error." The other women moved with her. Not dramatically, not with speeches, they simply went back to work, which was, Lydia understood, the bravest thing any of them had done. Beatrice appeared at her shoulder. "You told them." "You were right," Lydia said. Beatrice said nothing, which from Beatrice was as close to warmth as a Tuesday morning generally produced. But as Lydia turned back toward the office, Beatrice added quietly, "The Duke of Ashbourne sent a second note this morning. It's on your desk." "I saw it. You haven't opened it." "I will." She opened it an hour later, when the ledger was closed and the Edinburgh letter was sealed, and she had run out of tasks to use as reasons not to. It was brief. He had found the identity of a third supplier who was being approached, not yet contracted, but in conversation with a Prescott intermediary. If she wished to move preemptively, time was limited. He had included the supplier's name and business address. He had not included a suggested course of action. At the bottom, "Your decision entirely. I simply thought you should have the information while there was still room to use it." She read it twice. Then she picked up her pen and wrote back 4 words. "Come Thursday, 9 o'clock." She sealed it before she could change her mind. He came at 9, and she was already at the table with the account books open and a pot of tea she hadn't touched. "Sit down," she said without looking up. "I want to show you something." He sat. He did not comment on the fact that she had skipped every social formality that the morning would normally require. He simply folded his hands on the table and waited. She turned the account book to face him. "This is what we produce. Commercial ledgers, school primers, binding work for 3 private clients and 2 small publishers. This is our monthly revenue. This is our overhead." She moved her finger down the column. "And this is what changes if we lose the third supplier, before I can establish an alternative." Nathaniel looked at the numbers. She watched his face, not for pity. If she saw pity, she was going to close the book and end the conversation, but for comprehension. Whether he understood what the numbers actually meant. He did. She could see it in how quickly his expression shifted from reading to thinking. "The third supplier is Thomas Calloway," he said. "He has been in business 22 years. He is not particularly susceptible to financial pressure, but he is susceptible to social pressure. Prescott's intermediary has been working through a mutual acquaintance, not through money, which means if I approach Calloway directly, before the acquaintance has fully made his case, you have a reasonable chance of establishing a relationship that Prescott cannot easily dislodge." He paused. "Do you know Calloway?" "I know of him. We have not met. I have done business with him. Not recently, but his memory is reliable." Nathaniel looked at her steadily. "If it would be useful, I could arrange an introduction. Nothing more than that. The conversation would be yours." Lydia looked at him. Why? He seemed to consider whether the question deserved more than a plain answer. He decided it didn't, because what Prescott is doing is methodical and dishonest, and it is working. And I find that intolerable. "It isn't yo," he agreed. "But I am sitting across from it, and I have the ability to be useful. And choosing not to be useful because the fight doesn't belong to me has never made sense to me as a principle." Lydia was quiet for a moment. Outside, she could hear the faint rhythm of the presses starting up. Beatrice's voice, giving an instruction she couldn't quite make out. "An introduction," she said. "Nothing more. Nothing more. When I can arrange it within the week." She nodded once. "Then do it." He reached for his own copy of the supplier document and made a note. She watched his hands deliberate, no wasted movement, and thought about the fact that she had now allowed this man into the most protected part of her working life and was not, as of this particular moment, regretting it. That concerned her slightly. She filed the concern away for later. "There's something else," she said. He looked up. "Prescott will know his approach to Calloway has failed. When he does, he will move faster on whatever his next lever is." She turned to a second page in the account book. "I've been trying to identify what that lever might be. The building lease is the most obvious target. If he can challenge the lease terms, he'd need grounds. An expiration clause, a subletting provision, a breach of some kind." Nathaniel frowned at the page. "Do you have the lease document?" Lydia reached to her left and produced a folder she had pulled from her files that morning. She slid it across. He read it with the focused speed of someone who had read a great many contracts. Then he went still. She recognized the quality of that stillness. It was the stillness of someone who has just found the thing they were afraid of finding. "There's a use clause," he said. Third paragraph. "Second page," said quietly. "I found it yesterday." He looked up. "The original lease specifies residential and private commercial use. It does not explicitly include manufacturing. Printing presses qualify as manufacturing under the 1809 municipal definitions." She kept her voice level. "I know. I went to the registry myself. Does Prescott know you know? He will eventually. Whether he has already found it." She stopped. "If he brings a lease challenge on those grounds," Nathaniel said, "carefully, before you have established legal protection for your current use, we would have to cease operations while the challenge is adjudicated." She looked at him directly. "Which would take between 3 and 6 months, during which time our clients would find alternative suppliers. Our workers would need to find other employment, and by the time any judgment was rendered in our favor, there would be nothing left to return to." The room held that between them for a moment. Then Nathaniel said, "You need an opinion from a property solicitor. Today, not this week. I have an appointment at 2 o'clock." He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, not surprise exactly, but a recalibration. "You already arranged it." "I arranged it yesterday. After I found the clause." She closed the account book. "I am not telling you this because I need you to solve it. I am telling you because you have the commercial experience to understand why it matters, and I find it useful to speak to someone who follows the logic without requiring me to explain it from the beginning." He held her gaze. "That is a specific and somewhat unusual thing to say," he said. "I am a specific and somewhat unusual person."
"Yes," he said.
And there was something in how he said it that was not agreement so much as recognition. "You are." She picked up the tea that had gone cold an hour ago and drank it anyway. He watched her do it without comment, which she appreciated. "The solicitor's name is Harland," she said. "He has handled 3 property matters for me previously. If anyone can find a defense against the use clause challenge, it will be Hant." Lydia set down the cup. "Then I find another way, but I intend to start with Harland." The solicitor's office smelled of old paper and certainty, which Lydia had always found either comforting or alarming, depending on the occasion. Harland was 60 precise and constitutionally incapable of optimism, which made him an excellent lawyer and a challenging dinner companion. He read the lease clause twice, looked up at Lydia over his spectacles, and delivered his verdict with the brevity of a man who charged by the hour and respected his client's money. "It's a problem," he said. "I know it's a problem. Can it be addressed? There is a doctrine of established use. If you can demonstrate continuous operation of the same nature for a sufficient period without complaint from the landlord, a challenge on the use clause becomes significantly more difficult to sustain." He turned a page. "How long have you been operating the presses?" 4 years at this address. "And your landlord has made no written objection in that period?" "None. We have exchanged correspondence on 3 occasions, twice regarding minor repairs. Once regarding a rent review. He has referenced the workshop positively in each letter." Harland almost smiled. For Harland, almost smiling was equivalent to anyone else throwing their hat in the air. "Then we have something to work with. It is not airtight, but it is defensible." He made a note. I will need the correspondence and the original lease within 48 hours. You will have them tonight. She was back at Mercer House by 4, pulling files she had organized, with the particular care of someone who had always understood that paper was either a weapon or a shield, depending on who held it. Beatrice found her in the filing room. How did it go? We have a defense. It is not certain, but it exists. Beatrice was quiet for a moment. Then he's not going to stop, is he? Prescott. No, Lydia looked at her. I need the workshop to keep running as though none of this is happening. I need the Thursday order completed. I need Helen's primer proofed by Wednesday. And I need you to tell me immediately if anyone unusual comes asking questions about our operations, our suppliers, or our lease. She started to leave, then turned back. The Duke of Ashbourne. Lydia looked up from the files. Is he useful? Beatrice asked. The word was chosen deliberately. Not trustworthy. Not kind. Lydia thought about the documents on her table. The introduction to Calloway. The steady quality of his attention. Yes, she said. So far, Beatrice repeated. And left. The introduction to Thomas Calloway happened 4 days later at a private luncheon arranged with characteristic efficiency and minimal fuss. Calloway was 68, had the hands of a man who had worked his own presses for 30 years before graduating to managing others, and looked at Lydia across the table with the open assessment of someone who had dealt with enough people to trust his first impressions almost entirely. Nathaniel made the introduction, said 3 sentences about Lydia's workshop and its commercial record, and then fell silent in the way that a man falls silent when he has understood that his role in this conversation is now complete. Calloway looked at Nathaniel, then back at Lydia. He doesn't talk much for a duke. He talks when he has something to say, Lydia said. I find it restful. Calloway's mouth moved in what might have been approval. Your output. Commercial ledgers and school primers, Ashbourne said. And private binding work. We have 3 long-term clients in that category. Quality? I have not yet had a client return a complaint. Every supplier says that. I have the correspondence to support it. She reached into her bag and produced a folder, 3 letters from clients, unsolicited, commenting specifically on the quality of the finished work. She laid it on the table without ceremony. He read all 3. He was thorough. She let him be thorough. You're running under pressure right now, he said. Without looking up, Hargrove pulled out Alderton before that. Lydia did not ask how he knew. Men like Calloway always knew. Yes, someone got to them. Yes, he looked up. Same someone who sent a man named Fellows to have a very interesting lunch with my business manager last week? The table went very still. Lydia held his gaze. I believe so. Fellows told my manager that Mercer House was financially unstable and that supplying it would create reputational risk. Calloway folded the client letters and handed them back to her. My manager told Fellows that he would consult with me, which is what my manager says when he intends to do nothing of the kind and simply wants the conversation to end. Lydia kept her expression steady. Beside her, she could sense Nathaniel was doing the same. My manager also told me, Calloway continued, that Fellows seemed very confident. The kind of confident that comes from believing the conversation is already over. He picked up his fork. I dislike that kind of confident, as do I, Lydia said. What are your terms? She told him. She had prepared the terms carefully. Fair price. Realistic delivery schedule, a 6-month initial contract with renewal options. Not aggressive, not desperate. The terms of someone who expected to be taken seriously. Calloway listened without interrupting. When she finished, he ate 2 bites of his meal in contemplative silence. Then he said, I'll take the 6 months. If the quality holds, we'll discuss a longer arrangement. Lydia did not let the relief reach her face until she was in the carriage afterward. Alone with the door closed, she pressed both hands flat on her knees and breathed out slowly. 1 problem addressed, 2 still open, the lease. Whatever Prescott tried next. She had bought time. Time was not victory, but it was the material from which victory was made. If you used it correctly, They were walking back from Calloway's building. She had declined the carriage for the first quarter mile, without quite explaining why. And Nathaniel had fallen in to step beside her, without requiring the explanation when she said, "You were quiet in there. You didn't need me to speak." Most men in that room would have found a reason to speak anyway. Most men in that room would have found the silence uncomfortable. He kept his pace matched to hers. Unhurried. "I find silence useful. It's the only time you can hear what someone is actually thinking." Lydia glanced at him sideways. And what was Calloway thinking? He decided within the first 2 minutes. He spent the rest of the time deciding whether he wanted to say yes, in a way that gave you an advantage or a way that gave him one. And which did he choose? "He gave you the 6 months on your terms," Nathaniel said. "I would say he chose you." She looked ahead. Why? Because the client letters were real. Calloway has been in this business long enough to know the difference between letters a client writes because they are satisfied and letters a client writes because they mean it. He paused. Also, I believe he found fellows profoundly annoying. And contrarianism is a powerful motivator in men of his generation. Something close to a laugh escaped her. Small, involuntary. The kind that happens before you decide whether to allow it. That is an extremely practical analysis of human behavior, she said. "I spent 3 years in New York," he said. "You become practical, or you become irrelevant." She thought about that. About a younger version of this man before the title. Before the obligation, building something in a city that had no interest in his family name and considerable interest in whether he could deliver. She thought about what that must have formed in him. What it must have cost to walk away from it when his brother died. "Do you miss it?" she asked. New York. He was quiet for a moment. That told her she had asked something that mattered. "I miss who I was allowed to be there," he said. "I don't miss the place so much as the version of myself that it permitted." He paused. "That probably sounds self-indulgent." "It sounds honest," Lydia said. "Those two things are frequently confused." He looked at her. She kept her eyes forward. "You grew up partly in Boston," he said. "Your father's work. Until I was 14. Then my mother died and we came to England. And Boston became a thing I remembered, rather than a thing I lived." She thought about it, the particular quality of winter light there. The smell of the harbor, her mother's voice in a language that felt more like home than anything she had found in London since. "I think about it sometimes. What I would have become if we had stayed." "What do you think? Someone much less patient," she said. "And possibly happier." He was quiet again. Not the silence of discomfort. The silence of someone taking a thing seriously. "You've built something here that Boston would be proud of," he said finally. Not as flattery. As a simple statement of fact. She stopped walking. He stopped a half step later and turned to look at her. "Every suitor I have had," Lydia said, "has told me what I am or what I could be or what I ought to want. You are the first person in a very long time who has simply described what already exists." She held his gaze. "I don't know what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything with it," he said. "I said it because it's true. Not to produce a particular effect." She studied him. Standing on a London street in the ordinary noise of the city going about its business. She studied Nathaniel Caldwell the way she had studied the sea monster map, with the specific attention she reserved for things that did not fit the pattern she had built her defenses around. "Why haven't you proposed to anyone?" she asked. "Since you returned." "Because everyone I have been presented with has wanted the title," he said. Not unkindly, not dishonestly, but when someone looks at me and sees the Duke of Ashbourne, they are seeing a thing I did not build and do not entirely recognize. He met her eyes. "I spent too long building something real to want to be loved for something inherited." The silence between them was different from the silences before. Lydia felt it, recognized it, and made a decision. "I need to ask you something," she said. "And I need you to answer without softening it." "All right. When you came to me the first time." "With the folder, the documents about Prescott." She kept her voice even. "Was any part of that, was any part of your involvement in this motivated by wanting to be the person who solved it?" "Not for me, for yourself." He did not answer immediately. She had expected defensiveness, or the quick, smooth denial of a man who had prepared for questions like this one. She had not expected what she got, which was a long pause and then an expression that looked very much like honesty arriving somewhere it had been resisting. "Yes," he said, "part of it. I recognized a problem I had the tools to help address. And there is something in me that does not leave problems alone when I can reach them." He looked at her steadily. "I also genuinely wanted to help you. Both things were true. I did not examine them carefully enough to separate them before I acted." Lydia held his gaze. "That is the most honest thing any man has said to me in 6 years of London seasons," she said. "I'm not certain that speaks well of London," he said. "No," she agreed. "It doesn't." They stood there for a moment. The city moved around them without caring. "What are you afraid of?" he asked. Quietly, without preamble. She looked at him. "I beg your pardon?" "Every man has asked you what marriage could give you," he said. "What it would bring. What you would gain." He held her gaze with the particular steadiness she had begun to associate with him, not pressure, not performance, just the genuine attention of someone who considered the question worth asking carefully. "I would rather know what you are afraid it would take away." The street noise filled the space where she had expected to have a ready answer. She had spent 6 years constructing defenses against the proposals. She had built them well, brick by brick, each refusal another layer between herself and the thing she couldn't name. She knew why she had refused Henry Wycliffe. She could explain it in commercial terms, in practical terms, in every sensible term the situation offered. But standing here, with a man who was asking her not what she wanted but what she feared, she found that the defenses didn't have a door built to open from the inside. "Everything," she said. It came out quieter than she intended. "I am afraid that marriage would require me to trade everything I have built for the right to love someone. That I would do it, that I would not regret it until it was too late to undo." She stopped. "That is not a comfortable thing to say aloud." "No," he agreed. "It isn't. Most people would try to argue me out of it. I am not interested in arguing you out of something you have thought about longer and more carefully than I have." He looked at her. "I am interested in the fact that you said it. That is different." She looked away first. That was the moment she knew she was in trouble, not because of what he had said, because of the fact that looking away was a thing she had to choose, actively, and she was not accustomed to needing to choose it. "We should get back," she said, he said. They walked. They did not talk about what had just happened, but the silence had changed again. And they both knew it, and neither of them pretended otherwise. She was at the workshop until 9 that evening. She was reading through the final set of lease documents when Beatrice came to the door of the office with her coat already on, which meant she had been waiting for Lydia to finish and had run out of patience with waiting. "Go home," Beatrice said. 5 more minutes. "You said that an hour ago." Beatrice leaned against the doorframe. "Did you know that when women work themselves past the point of usefulness, they stop making good decisions and start making fast ones? I read that somewhere. I'm telling you now because you are starting to look like someone making fast decisions." Lydia set down the document. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. Just for a moment. Then she dropped them. "The lease defense is solid," she said. "Harlan thinks it will hold. Good Calloway is on contract." The Thursday order went out without a single error. She picked up her pen and put it down again. "We are still standing." "We are still standing," Beatrice agreed. "And Prescott will know all of that by the end of the week. And he will find something else to try, and I do not yet know what it will be." Beatrice was quiet for a moment. Then she came into the office properly and sat down in the opposite chair, which she rarely did. Which meant she had decided this was a sitting-down conversation. "The Duke of Ashbourne," she said. Lydia did not answer. "He arranged the Calloway meeting. He arranged the introduction." "I conducted the meeting." "I know you did." Beatrice folded her hands on the desk. "What I am asking is different from that." She paused. "He is not what I expected." What did you expect? A man who wanted to appear useful so that you would feel obligated. She said it plainly, without apology. That is what men usually are when they appear at moments of difficulty with relevant information and perfectly timed assistance. And instead, Beatrice looked at her steadily. He sent you information and told you it carried no obligation. He sat through an entire meeting with Calloway and spoke 4 sentences, all of which were necessary. He has not once, as far as I can tell, suggested that you are handling this incorrectly. No, Lydia said. He hasn't. That worries you, Beatrice said. Lydia looked at her. It should worry you too. Why? Because it is much easier to refuse someone who behaves like every other person who has asked for something from me. She held Beatrice's gaze. And I have become very good at refusing people. I am not certain I am equally good at the other thing. Beatrice was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, You're not afraid of him, I know. You're afraid of yourself. Lydia said nothing. Lydia. Beatrice's voice was not soft, it was never soft, but it was careful. What he takes away is not the workshop, it is not this room. It is not the women or the presses or the lease. She paused. What you are afraid of is that you will give those things up voluntarily. Because you will want to. And you have never wanted to before. The press room was silent. The city outside had gone to its particular evening quiet. Lydia sat with that for a moment. Go home, Beatrice said again. Gently this time. Lydia picked up her coat. At the door she stopped. Did you actually like him? When you saw him at the Calloway meeting. Beatrice considered this with the seriousness she gave every question that deserved seriousness. I think he is a man who is trying to be better than his instincts, she said finally. That is the best thing any person can be in my experience. She turned off the lamp. Lydia went home. She did not sleep particularly well. But for the first time in 3 weeks, it was not Prescott's documents keeping her awake. It was a question she had not been asked before and could not, for the life of her, stop turning over and over in the quiet of the dark room. What are you afraid marriage would take away? She knew the answer she had given him. She was beginning to suspect it was not the whole answer. And that was the thing she had not yet worked out how to say. The newspaper arrived on a Wednesday morning, and it arrived the way bad news always arrives quietly. In the hands of someone who didn't know what they were carrying. Maggie brought it to the breakfast table without comment, which meant she had already read it and had decided the comment could wait until Lydia had seen it herself. Lydia read it standing up. The column was on the 4th page, tucked between a notice about municipal road improvements and an advertisement for a tooth powder that promised results it could not possibly deliver. It was not a long piece. It did not need to be. Whoever had written it understood that the most damaging things could be said in 3 short paragraphs. Miss Lydia Mercer, the American-born heiress who has made something of a name for herself in London social circles by refusing every eligible man within reasonable reach, has been engaged in a rather more peculiar enterprise than most of her admirers have known. Sources familiar with her affairs report that the so-called Mercer House, long described as a charitable printing concern, operates in fact as a commercial manufacturing establishment employing women of uncertain social standing, funded by inheritance monies that might otherwise have supported a proper household. Whether Miss Mercer's female empire constitutes industry or eccentricity, her backers may wish to consider whether their association reflects the reputation they intend. Lydia set the paper down. She picked up her tea. She drank it. She set it down, she said. No byline, Maggie said. But the phrasing female empire, that is not a phrase a journalist invents independently. Someone gave them that. Prescott. Almost certainly. Lydia looked at the window. Outside, London was conducting its ordinary morning. Carts and footsteps and pigeons and the indifference of a city that had already moved past this particular Wednesday without knowing what it contained. How wide is the readership, she said. Wide enough, Maggie said. The alderman's wife takes it. 3 of our private binding clients' households take it. She paused. Lady Forsyth takes it. Lydia picked up the paper again and read the column a second time. Slowly. Not because she had missed anything, because she wanted to understand exactly what she was dealing with. Women of uncertain social standing. That was the phrase that would do the most damage. Not to her, her reputation had survived 12 public refusals without permanent injury. But to the women at the presses, to Beatrice, to every client who had been comfortable doing business with a workshop run by capable women and would now need to calculate whether that comfort still served them. She set the paper down a second time. I need to get to Mercer House before anyone else shows them this. She was out the door in 4 minutes. She was too late by 20 minutes. Helen had seen it, a neighbor's copy, brought over the back fence with the particular energy people reserve for bad news they are genuinely sorry about and slightly excited by. By the time Lydia arrived, Helen had told Mary. Mary had told the others. And the press room had the specific quality of a space where everyone is working very hard and thinking about something entirely different. Beatrice met her at the door. They know. I know they know. How are they? Angry, Beatrice said. Which is the correct response? She fell into step beside Lydia. 2 of the private clients have already sent notes this morning. One is simply inquiring about the status of a current order that one is fine. The other is, she paused, asking whether we anticipate any disruption to our operations in the coming weeks, which is polite language for whether they should find another binder. Yes. Lydia walked through the press room without stopping. She went to the center of it and stood there until the machines went quiet one by one and the women turned to look at her. She looked back at them. Every face. Helen's jaw set tight with something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite fear. Mary's hands folded in front of her apron. The younger women. 2 of them, who had been here less than a year, and who were watching her the way people watch the person they have decided to trust when they are not yet certain that trust will hold. You've read it, Lydia said. Nobody needed to. Everything in it is accurate, she said. We are a commercial operation. We employ women who needed work and had the skill to do it. We use the income from commercial contracts to cover our costs and pay fair wages. Every one of those things is true, and I have never been ashamed of any of them. She let that settle. Whoever planted that column wants you to feel that you should be ashamed. I am asking you not to give them that, Helen said. Are we going to lose the clients? I don't know yet. I am going to fight for every one of them. Whether I win all of them, she stopped. I will not promise you something I cannot guarantee. Helen nodded once. Then she turned back to her press. One by one, the others followed. Beatrice touched Lydia's arm briefly as she passed, not quite a gesture of comfort. More the acknowledgement of one person to another that the moment had been handled correctly. It was the most Beatrice generally offered, and it was enough. Lydia went to her office and began writing letters. She was 3 letters in when the note from Nathaniel arrived. I've seen the column. I'm coming at noon, if you'll allow it. If not, say the word and I'll stay away and see. She wrote back 2 words. Come, please. She had not written please to a man regarding his company in longer than she could easily remember. She noticed it and kept writing her letters anyway. He arrived at noon with nothing in his hands, which she had come to understand meant he had no documents. No plan and no solution prepared. He was simply coming because she had said, please. She told him that when she saw him, I should tell you I wrote please without thinking about it. If that changes your expectations about this meeting. It doesn't, he said. And sat down. She told him about the clients, the 2 notes. The 3 she had already written in response, explaining Mercer House's operations. Its commercial record, its client history. She told him about the lease challenge Harland was working to head off, which had now become more urgent because a public campaign of reputational damage was clearly running simultaneously. Nathaniel listened to all of it. He did not reach for solutions. He asked 3 questions, precise, practical. The questions of someone mapping the territory rather than charging into it, and she answered them, and they sat together with the full picture of what Prescott was doing, and it was, when laid out completely, quite elegant in its ugliness. The newspaper column created social doubt. The supplier pressure created operational strain. The lease challenge created legal uncertainty. None of the three alone was fatal. Together, they were designed to create exactly the kind of exhaustion that made people sell. He doesn't need to win any individual battle, Lydia said. He only needs to make continuing too costly. Yes, Nathaniel said. That is a very particular kind of strategy. It requires patience, and it requires resources, and it requires not caring whether the person you are targeting knows what you are doing. Because, by the time they know, the damage is done. Yes. She looked at him. He proposed to me 14 months ago and I declined, and 6 weeks later he began moving against the workshop. That is not impulsive. He planned this. Yes, which means he also planned the polite acceptance of my refusal. The line about admiring my independence. She felt something cold move through her. He said exactly what would make me remember him as a decent man while he was already working out the alternative route. Nathaniel's expression tightened in a way she had not seen from him before. Not anger, or not only anger, something more controlled than that, and more dangerous for being controlled. I want to tell you something, he said. And I need you to hear it as information, not as me deciding what to do. She looked at him steadily. Tell me. I have a meeting tomorrow with a man who runs 3 of the largest commercial paper operations in the northern counties. We have done business together previously. If I were to speak to him not about Mercer House specifically, but about the general question of supply chain interference and the commercial practices of certain London investors, it would take him approximately 4 days to make Prescott's position in his supply networks very uncomfortable. Lydia held his gaze. And I have not yet decided whether to mention it. Because it is your fight, and not mine, and I am telling you so that you can tell me whether you want me to raise it or not. He paused. That is all I am saying. She sat with that for a moment. Raise it, she said. The general question, not my name. Not Mercer House. He nodded. Understood. And Nathaniel—
It was the first time she had used his given name.
She saw him register it. Thank you for asking. Something moved in his eyes that he didn't let reach his face. You're welcome, he said quietly. They worked for another hour going through the client letters together. Lydia drafting and Nathaniel occasionally suggesting a single word or a change in sequencing that tightened the argument without altering the voice. It was good work. The kind of work that felt productive because it actually was. And that felt easy, because both people doing it were competent and not performing competence for each other. At one point their hands were both on the same document, and he reached past her to indicate a line, and the sleeve of his coat brushed her wrist, and neither of them moved for 1 second longer than was necessary, and then they both moved and kept working. She was aware of him in the room the way she was aware of the pressman, working on the other side of the wall, not an abstraction exactly, but as a presence that had become part of the texture of the space without her having decided to allow it. That was new. That was if she was honest with herself. Concerning. He left it too. He did not linger. He did not create an occasion for anything other than a handshake, which was businesslike and brief, and left her staring at the closed door for approximately 4 seconds before she went back to work. The first client letter came back the next day. It was from the private binding client who had sent the concerned inquiry. It was polite, regretful, and final. They would not be renewing their contract. Lydia read it, filed it, and kept working. The second came 2 days later. This one was different, a commercial ledger client. Steady business for 2 years, no previous complaints. The letter cited a reorganization of their own operations as the reason. It was not a convincing explanation, but it was the one they had chosen, and she could not argue them out of it. 2 clients in 4 days. Between them, roughly 15% of Mercer House's annual income. Beatrice brought her the figures that evening, and did not dress them up. We can absorb this. We cannot absorb more. I know. If a third... Beatrice. Beatrice set the figures on the desk and did not leave immediately. She stood there for a moment, with the expression of someone who has something to say and is deciding whether the timing is right. He is not at fault for the client's leaving, she said finally. Lydia looked up the Duke. I know you know that. I am saying it because sometimes it helps to have someone say the obvious thing plainly. She paused. You are going to be angry at someone. I want to make sure you are angry at the right person. Lydia looked at her for a long moment. Then Nathaniel's note arrived. Maggie brought it in with the expression she wore when she had already formed an opinion and was exercising considerable self-control about keeping it to herself. The note was not brief this time. Lydia, I need to tell you something, and I am telling you in writing, because I want you to have time to respond to it in whatever way you choose before you have to look at me. 3 days ago, I became aware that Prescott's legal team was preparing to accelerate the lease challenge. The timeline I had originally estimated was wrong. They were moving in days, not weeks. I had the means to delay that action by purchasing a portion of the commercial debt associated with the building, a legal, documented transaction, a matter of public record through an intermediary. I did it. I did not tell you first. I intended to. I made the decision in a window of approximately 2 hours when I believed delay was not possible. And I told myself that you would understand the urgency when you saw the outcome. The outcome is that Prescott's legal team has halted the lease action while they reassess the changed financial structure. You have gained time. I know what I did. I know what it looks like. I know that what you feared from every man who proposed to you was exactly this: someone with resources, deciding that he knew better and acting on it without asking. I did not steal your money, but I made a decision that was yours to make. And I made it without you. I am sorry, that is inadequate. But it is what I have, and Lydia read the letter once. Then she read it again. The room was very quiet. Maggie, who had not moved from the doorway, said nothing. Lydia folded the letter, placed it on the desk, stood up. Send a message to the Duke of Ashbourne, she said. Her voice was entirely level. Ask him to come this evening at 6. Maggie left. Lydia sat back down and stared at the folded letter and understood, with a clarity that was almost physical, that she was not as angry about the outcome as she should be, and that this made her considerably angrier than the outcome itself. He had saved the lease. She knew that. She understood the arithmetic. Without his intervention, Prescott's legal team would have moved within days. The lease challenge would have been filed before Harland had the defense fully prepared. And the disruption to operations during adjudication would have been exactly the slow death Prescott had designed it to be. He had also walked into her life, looked her in the eyes, asked her what she feared marriage would take away, and then in the span of a 2-hour window taken precisely that. Not the building, not the business, not the money. The choice. He came at 6. He did not bring anything. He sat in the chair across from her desk and looked at her without the particular self-protective expression that men generally assembled when they expected to be found guilty of something. He looked like a man who had already found himself guilty and was waiting to hear the sentence. She let the silence hold for a moment, not to punish him, because she needed to say this correctly, and she had been working out the correct way to say it since 3 o'clock. You gained time, she said. I know that. The lease action is halted, and I have weeks now that I did not have before. He said nothing. I am not going to pretend the outcome is valueless, she said. That would be dishonest, and you deserve honesty. Lydia, I am not finished. Her voice was quiet, absolutely steady. You asked me what I was afraid marriage would take away. Told you. And then you went home and you sat with the information about Prescott's timeline, and you looked at the problem, and you decided that you could solve it. And you solved it, and you did not ask me. She paused. Did you tell me? No. Did you believe I would have wanted you to? He was quiet for a moment. Then, I believed you would have said yes if I had explained the urgency. I told myself that believing it was enough. It wasn't. No, he said. It wasn't. She looked at him. You asked me what I feared. And then you did the thing I feared. Not from cruelty. Not from malice. From exactly the instinct you told me about, the one that says every problem can be solved if the right person takes control. She held his gaze. You decided you were the right person, without asking whether I agreed. The silence between them was different from every silence they had shared before. Those silences had been productive, the silence of two people thinking in the same direction. This one was the silence of something cracking along a fault line that had always been there. You are right, he said. It was not a performance of contrition. It was a man identifying an error with the same precision he would bring to identifying a flaw in a contract. I have spent 36 years believing that the most useful thing I can be is the person who sees the solution and acts on it. I have been right about that often enough that it has become a reflex. He paused. You are the first person who has ever made me understand what that reflex cost the person standing next to me. Lydia looked at him. I did not steal your money, he said, but I took the right that mattered more than money. The right to decide. You told me that. You told me clearly. And He stopped.
I have no excuse that is actually an excuse.
No, she said. You don't. She stood. She walked to the window and stood there with her back to him for a moment. Not because she couldn't look at him, because she needed to say the next thing without watching his face while she said it. I had begun to trust you, she said. I do not do that quickly or easily or often. You know that. I had begun to trust that you were different from the pattern. That when you asked what I feared, you were asking because you intended to be careful with the answer. She stopped. And then you weren't careful with it. She heard him stand. She heard him take one step. Don't, she said. He stopped. I need you to hear this without coming closer. She turned around. I am not ending this. I am not telling you to leave London or to stay away from events where we might encounter each other. I am telling you that I had built something that required trust to function. And you have damaged it, and I need time to determine whether it can bear weight again. He looked at her. His expression was not devastated, it was worse than that. It was the expression of a man who is being entirely seen, possibly for the first time, and finding the experience neither comfortable nor deniable. What I need from you right now, Lydia said, is not an argument. Not another apology. Not a plan for how to fix what you've broken. She held his gaze. I need you to go home and let me think. And I need to know that you can do that without deciding that my thinking is a problem that requires your intervention. Something moved across his face that she couldn't fully name. Pain, perhaps. The particular pain of a man who has just understood exactly how far his instincts had carried him from where he meant to be. I can do that. Then do it. He picked up his hat. He walked to the door. Nathaniel, she said. He stopped. The letter, she said. The fact that you wrote it before I could look at you. She stopped. Started again. That told me something. He waited. It told me that some part of you already knew, she said. Before you acted. Some part of you knew what it would cost me. And you acted anyway. She held his gaze. I am still deciding what to do with that. He nodded once. He left. She stood in the room for a long time after the sound of his footsteps had gone. The next morning, Prescott's second letter arrived. It was addressed to her directly this time, no intermediary. No polite fiction, Warren Prescott in his own hand. On his own letterhead, requesting a meeting at his office at her earliest convenience to discuss what he called a mutually beneficial arrangement regarding the future of the Mercer House building and its operations. She read it twice. She set it down. She thought about Nathaniel's transaction sitting somewhere in a registry office. A matter of public record, his name attached to a portion of the debt structure that Prescott had been using as a lever. Prescott knew. He had found it. And now he was calling her directly because the intermediary approach had become complicated, and he had decided to try the direct line. She picked up her pen and wrote back, Mr. Prescott, I will meet with you Friday at 10. I will bring my solicitor. Please ensure yours is present as well. L. Mercer. She sent the note and went to find Harland. The meeting was on Friday, and it was exactly as civil as two people who thoroughly disliked each other could make it while lawyers sat in the same room. Warren Prescott was exactly as she remembered him: polished, controlled, the particular variety of handsome that is really just expensive maintenance applied consistently over time. He sat across the table from her with his solicitor to his left and a folder in front of him and the calm of a man who believed he was holding the better cards. "Miss Mercer," he said. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Prescott." She settled her hands in her lap. "You called the meeting." "Please proceed." He opened the folder. He explained, with considerable courtesy, that the building occupied by Mercer House had become subject to a complex set of financial and legal circumstances. That the disruption to her operations over the past months must have been considerable. That he was in a position to relieve that disruption entirely through the purchase of the building and its existing lease obligations. At a price he considered generous, he named the price. Harland, beside her, wrote something on his notepad without expression. "The building is not for sale," Lydia said. "Miss Mercer, I think if you examine the financial realities—" "I have examined them," she said. "Thoroughly, including the reality that several of my supplier contracts were terminated following contact with your intermediaries, including the use clause challenge that your legal team prepared and then halted when the debt structure became more complicated than anticipated." She looked at him without particular heat. "I am aware of the shape of what has been done, Mr. Prescott. I am asking you to stop doing it." Something shifted in Prescott's expression. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was the shift of a man who had expected a different conversation. "I don't know what you imagine," he began. "I imagine nothing," Lydia said. "I have documentation. My solicitor has documentation. The commercial registry has documentation." She paused. "I am not here to threaten you with it. I am here to tell you that the building is not for sale, that Mercer House will continue to operate, and that I am prepared to spend as long as necessary making the continued pursuit of this strategy more trouble than the property is worth." Prescott looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Harland, then back at her. "You have a partner now," he said. And the courtesy had thinned by several layers. "The Duke of Ashbourne. I have a solicitor and a capable workforce," Lydia said. "The rest is a private matter. The debt purchase he made is a matter of public record which I am sure your team has examined thoroughly." She met his eyes. "I suggest you examine it again, specifically the section regarding controlling interest in operational decisions." Harland, to his considerable credit, maintained an entirely neutral expression. Despite the fact that Lydia had just implied something she had not yet confirmed was accurate and was watching Prescott's face for the reaction. She saw it, the slight recalculation, the pause of a man who is no longer certain what is in the documents he hasn't fully read. "I see," Prescott said. "Good," Lydia said. "Then we understand each other." She stood. Harland stood. The meeting ended with handshakes that meant nothing and courtesy that meant less. Outside on the pavement, Harland looked at her with the expression of a man who has just watched someone play a card they may not have actually been holding. "The controlling interest provision," he said. "I need you to look into it," Lydia said. "Today." "I know," she said. "But he doesn't know that I know. And that is worth something." She walked away quickly. Before Harland could finish calculating the risk, and thought about Nathaniel's transaction sitting in a registry office. She thought about what he had done without asking. She thought about the fact that it had just given her the only leverage she'd had in this room. And she thought about how those two things existing simultaneously was perhaps the most complicated thing she had encountered 6 years this season, the fact that the thing she was most angry about was also, in this particular moment, the thing keeping her standing. She did not forgive him for it, but she understood. Walking through the London morning, that understanding and forgiving were not the same. And that she was going to have to sit with both of them for a while, before she knew what she intended to do. She went back to Mercer House. the presses were running. She sat at her desk and looked at the folded letter she had not yet returned to its envelope. And she did not touch it, and she did not reach for her pen. And she let the sound of the machines fill the room the way they always did, steady and deliberate, and entirely indifferent to the complicated arithmetic of trust. 3 weeks passed without a word from Nathaniel Caldwell. Not a note, not a card, not a message through Maggie or a carefully arranged coincidence at a social gathering. London was a city of 300,000 people and an aristocracy that occupied perhaps 200 drawing rooms. And in 3 weeks he had managed to be entirely absent from everyone she entered. She noticed. She did not want to notice, and she noticed anyway. The way you notice a sound that is stopped not by its presence, but by the particular quality of the silence where it used to be. Mercer House kept running. That was the thing she held on to when everything else felt uncertain. The presses ran, the Thursday orders went out. Calloway delivered on schedule. Without incident, with the quiet reliability of a man who had decided to be useful and intended to follow through. Harland sent a letter confirming that the lease defense was now fully documented and filed, and that Prescott's legal team had made no further moves following the Friday meeting. The 2 departed clients had not returned. 2 new ones had arrived, smaller accounts, referred by a commercial contact in the city who had heard, through channels Lydia could not fully trace, that Mercer House produced reliable work and kept its agreements. She did not ask where the referral had originated. She thought she knew. She put that thought in the same place she had put the folded letter and the question she had not yet answered and the sound of his footsteps going down the front steps 3 weeks ago. It was a crowded place, that mental shelf. She was running out of room. Beatrice said nothing directly. This was its own kind of commentary. Beatrice was constitutionally incapable of sustained silence on a subject she considered important, which meant that her silence on this particular subject was deliberate and had been decided upon at some point and was being maintained with effort. Lydia was aware of this and grateful for it, and occasionally found it nearly unbearable. On the 22nd day, Harlan sent a second letter. She read it at her desk in the early morning, before anyone else had arrived, with the city just beginning its noise outside and the presses cold and the workshop holding its breath the way it always did in the hour before the women came in and made it into itself. The letter was 2 pages. The first page contained the legal analysis of Nathaniel's debt purchase, what it entitled him to, what it didn't, what the controlling interest provision actually said when read carefully by a man who had spent 40 years reading such things. The second page contained something she had not asked for. Harland, who was not given to editorializing, had attached a single paragraph at the end with the note, "I include this as information only, as I believe you would wish to have it regardless of what you do with it." The paragraph described what Nathaniel had done with the debt he had purchased. Not kept it, not used it to establish any claim over Mercer House's operations. He had transferred it, every portion of it, into a trust structure controlled entirely by the workshop itself, by Beatrice as named trustee, by the operational collective of Mercer House. He had transferred it 10 days ago, quietly, without informing her. No love letter, no request for gratitude. The only correspondence that had accompanied the legal transfer was a single line. Written to Harland, "Please ensure Miss Mercer receives documentation of this at her convenience." There is no reply required. Lydia read the paragraph twice. She set the letter down. She sat with it in the quiet of the empty workshop for a long time. He had not given it to her. That was the thing that caught in her chest when she examined it carefully. He had not transferred the debt to Lydia Mercer. He had transferred it to the structure she had built. To Beatrice, to the women, to the thing that existed independently of whether Lydia trusted him or loved him or forgave him, or none of those things. He had understood the difference. She was not certain she had expected him to. She put the letter in the drawer. She went to make the tea before the women arrived. And she thought, while the water heated, about what it meant when someone did the right thing, not to be seen doing it, but because it was simply the right thing. She was still thinking about it when Beatrice walked in at 7:30 and looked at her face and said, without preamble, what happened? Lydia told her about the transfer. Beatrice sat down. That alone told Lydia something. Beatrice did not sit down casually. She sat down when the weight of a thing required it. He transferred it to us, Beatrice said. To the trust. To you as trustee. Beatrice was quiet for a moment. Then he didn't tell you he was going to do it? No. He didn't tell me either. No. Beatrice looked at the table. She picked up her spectacles and put them on, and then took them off again. Which meant she was thinking hard enough that the usual props of the workday had become irrelevant. Lydia, she said, that man went to Harlan's office and transferred a significant financial asset into the control of a workshop he has no claim over. Run by women he has met twice, without anyone asking him to, and without telling anyone he'd done it. I know, I am not a sentimental woman, I know that, too. But I want you to understand, Beatrice said carefully, that what he did is not what men do. It is not what anyone does. Particularly, people who make mistakes and want to be forgiven make grand gestures in the direction of the person whose forgiveness they want. They do not make quiet corrections in the direction of the thing they were wrong about. Lydia looked at her. He wasn't trying to win you back, Beatrice said. He was trying to fix what he broke. Those are different operations. Lydia said nothing for a long moment. Then I know, she said. And this time it was not a deflection. It was the acknowledgement of a woman who had been sitting with a truth for 22 days and had just run out of reasons not to say it aloud. Helen arrived then, and Mary behind her, and the workshop returned to itself in the way it always did, suddenly. Fully, without ceremony. But Beatrice caught Lydia's eye across the room before she put her spectacles on and went to her work. The look said, figure it out. Lydia went to her office and opened her correspondence and wrote 4 business letters and answered 2 and stared at the drawer where she had put Harlan's letter, and then opened the drawer and put the letter in her bag and went to find Nathaniel Caldwell. She had not been to Ashbourne House before. It was in the part of London where the addresses carried their own gravity, where the buildings had the particular confidence of things that have been standing long enough to stop justifying their existence. She gave the door her card and was shown into a morning room that had the quality of a space used by someone who worked in it rather than received in it, books with broken spines. Papers stacked with a logic only their owner fully understood. A chair angled toward the window in a way that suggested someone sat there often enough to wear a preference into the arrangement. She was waiting perhaps 5 minutes before he came in. He looked the same. That was the first thing she registered. And it was unreasonable to have expected otherwise, and she had expected otherwise anyway, that 3 weeks of consequence would have left some visible mark. But he was exactly himself, composed, attentive. The particular economy of movement she had catalogued without meaning to over the months of their acquaintance. He stopped when he saw her, not with surprise exactly. With the stillness of someone who has been waiting for something they did not permit themselves to expect. Miss Mercer, he said. I received Harlan's letter this morning, she said. She did not sit. She had decided on the walk over that she needed to say this standing. The second letter, with the addendum about the transfer. He said nothing. You didn't tell me you were going to do it. No, he said. Is that because you knew I would argue with you about it? He considered this with genuine care. No. It's because I had decided that the right thing to do and the thing that would make you trust me again were 2 different operations. And I should concentrate on the right thing and stop worrying about the trust. He held her gaze. I had been confusing them. Doing the right thing in order to be forgiven is not the same as doing it because it's correct. I needed to separate those. Lydia looked at him. That is a very precise understanding of your own motivations. I have had 3 weeks with very little to do except develop it. Something close to a smile moved across her face before she caught it. She let it go anyway. Beatrice is the trustee, she said. She runs the workshop. It was appropriate. You have met Beatrice twice. Twice was enough to know she would hold it correctly. Lydia looked at him for a long moment. She thought about Beatrice saying, he was trying to fix what he broke. She thought about the drawer in her desk and the 22 days and the sound of his absence in every room she had walked into since. I owe you an honest accounting, she said. He waited. I have been angry at you, she said, genuinely. Not performed anger, real anger. The kind that sits in your chest and makes your thinking slower and your sleep worse and your tea taste wrong. I have been angry because you did the specific thing I told you I feared. And you did it while knowing I feared it, and that made the ordinary wrongness of it into something that felt like, she stopped. It felt like proof, like evidence for the case I had always been making. That eventually every man decides he knows better. I understand, he said quietly. I'm not finished. She took a breath. I have also been angry at myself. For different reasons. She looked at him directly. I had begun to rely on your presence, not on your decisions. On the quality of your attention. The fact of someone who followed the logic without requiring explanation. Someone who asked instead of assumed, except for the one time he didn't. She paused. Losing that felt like losing something I hadn't understood I was keeping. He was very still. What I have spent 3 weeks working out, Lydia said, is whether being angry at you for making one catastrophic mistake in a history of consistent respect is wisdom, or whether it is the old fear looking for a justification to stay in place. The room held the sound of the city outside. Carriages, pigeons, the ordinary noise of London not caring what happened in this room. What did you decide? He asked. I decided, she said, that there is a difference between a man who makes a mistake because he thinks he knows better and a man who makes a mistake because his instincts are faster than his understanding. The first is a character, the second is a flaw, she held his gaze. And that a flaw can be worked on if the person who has it has the honesty to see it. Nathaniel looked at her. And you think I have that honesty? You wrote me a letter before I could look at you, she said. Yes. He sat down then, not dramatically. Not as a performance of relief, simply as a man whose legs had decided the standing portion of this conversation was probably over. Lydia sat across from him. I have something to tell you as well, he said. About the 3 weeks she waited, I went to Beatrice, he said. Lydia looked up sharply. When? 11 days ago. I went to Mercer House while I knew you would be at Harlan's office. I asked to speak with Beatrice alone. He paused. I asked her one question. I asked her what you would do if I weren't here, if I had never come. If there had been no folder, no Callaway introduction, no debt purchase, what would you have done? Lydia was very quiet. She said you would have found another door, he said. She said you always find another door. And I realized that I had been operating under a belief I hadn't examined, he said. That my involvement had been necessary, that the outcome depended on me being there. He looked at her steadily. It didn't. You would have found the suppliers. You would have found the lease defense. The meeting with Prescott would have gone differently. Perhaps, but you would have found the leverage somewhere. You always find it. My involvement was not rescue. It was company, useful company for a time, and then I forgot the distinction. Lydia looked at him for a long moment. Beatrice told you that, she said. About the door. She told me that and several other things, he said. None of which I will repeat because she told them to me in confidence and because Beatrice Holloway frightens me slightly, and I intend to stay on her correct side. This time the almost smile became an actual one. Small, real, the kind that happens before you decide. She frightens everyone slightly, Lydia said. That is part of why the workshop functions. I know, he said. I found it admirable. They sat together for a moment. Not the silence of two people avoiding something. The silence of two people who have said the difficult things and are taking a breath before the next ones. The Ashbourne estate, Lydia said. You said 3 weeks ago that it had obligations. That it was more complicated than it appeared from the outside. He looked at her carefully. Yes, tell me about it. She folded her hands in her lap. Not to be polite. Because I want to know what you're actually carrying. You've spent 4 months knowing what I'm carrying. It seems fair. He looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man who has been asked a question he didn't prepare to answer and is deciding whether to answer it anyway. He decided to. He told her about his brother, not the fact of his death, which she knew, but the shape of what the death had revealed. The debts quietly accumulated over 7 years. The tenants whose situations had been mismanaged not through cruelty but through inattention. The estate staff who had been loyal for decades and whose loyalty had not been repaid with any kind of corresponding security. The sister, 24 years old, whose inheritance had been structured in ways that limited her control over her own money, in ways Nathaniel had been working to restructure since his return. He talked about it the way she talked about the supply contracts, not with self-pity. Not with the performance of burden, but with the clear-eyed precision of someone mapping a problem in order to solve it. She listened the way she listened to everything that mattered. Thoroughly, without preparing her response while he was still speaking. When he finished, she said, "Your sister, the inheritance restructure. Has it been filed?" "Good." She paused. "The tenants. You said their situations had been mismanaged." "Yes." "What have you done about it so far?" He told her. She asked 3 questions. He answered them, and then asked one of his own about a specific financial structure he was considering. Something he had seen used in commercial contexts that might apply to estate management differently, and she looked at the ceiling for a moment and said, "There's a better approach." "Yes," he said. She told him. It took 15 minutes and involved a set of calculations she worked out in her head and then found paper to write on, because the numbers needed to be seen to be believed. And by the end he was leaning forward with his elbows on his knees and looking at the paper the way she had looked at the Callaway supply structure, with the recognition of someone encountering a solution that was actually correct. "Where did you learn that?" he said. "My mother's family were Boston merchants for 3 generations," she said. "I grew up understanding that money was a tool, and that a tool used incorrectly was just weight." She set the paper down. "My father taught me sentiment. My mother's people taught me arithmetic. I find both useful." He looked at her. "You've been running an estate of your own for 6 years. Mercer House is not an estate. It has a workforce, a budget, supply chain obligations, and a set of human relationships that require management." He held her gaze. "What is that if not an estate?" Lydia looked at him. Then she laughed. A real one, the kind she had not heard from herself in 3 weeks. It surprised her. She suspected it surprised him too. From the way something opened in his expression, not satisfaction at having produced it, but the simple human response of being near something that sounds like relief. "I want to say something," he said, when the laugh had settled. "Then say it. I am not going to propose to you today." She looked at him. "All right. I want to be clear about why." He held her gaze with the particular directness she had come to trust more than almost any other quality he had. "Not because I don't want to. Because we have, this afternoon, re-establishing a foundation that 3 weeks ago I damaged. And I will not use the momentum of this afternoon to reach for something that should be asked at a different moment." He paused. "I learned recently that the timing of an action matters as much as the action itself." Lydia held his gaze. "You did learn that," she said quietly. "I am still learning it," he said. "But I am learning it." He stood with her. "Come to Mercer House on Thursday," she said. "Beatrice wants to discuss the Callaway contract renewal. Your commercial knowledge would be useful in the conversation." He looked at her steadily. "As useful company. As someone whose judgment I have examined carefully and found generally reliable," she said. "With a noted exception that has been addressed." The corner of his mouth moved. "Not precursor to one." "Thursday," he said. 9 o'clock, she said. "Don't be late." She picked up her bag and walked to the door. "Lydia." He stopped. "Thank you," she said. "For coming." She stood in the doorway for a moment. She thought about 22 days. about the letter in her drawer. About a man who had gone to Beatrice and asked what you would do if I weren't here, and then walked away from his own answer instead of using it to negotiate his way back in. Don't make me regret it, she said. She went home. She felt for the first time in 3 weeks that the shelf in her mind where she had been stacking the unresolved things was somewhat lighter. Not empty, not resolved, but lighter, in the way that a room becomes lighter when you open the window not because anything has been removed, but because something has been allowed to move. The Thursday meeting was productive and unremarkable, which was the best possible outcome. Beatrice negotiated the Callaway renewal with the focused efficiency of someone who had been running a workshop for 4 years and intended to run it for 40 more. Nathaniel contributed 2 observations about contract term structure that Beatrice accepted with the particular expression she wore when someone said something useful, and she intended to use it but not comment on using it. Afterward, while Lydia was going over the morning's output with Helen, she was aware of Nathaniel talking with Mary near the binding station, not about the workshop, just talking the way people talk when there is no agenda, and both parties are comfortable with that. She heard Mary laugh at something he said. She heard him ask about the primer order, specifically, and whether the school that commissioned it had given any feedback. Small things, but the nature of character was revealed in small things. She had believed that for years. She believed it more now. He left at noon. He said goodbye to Beatrice first, which Lydia also noticed. 3 days later, a note arrived that contained nothing but a question. The Forsyth Charitable Exhibition is Saturday. I intend to attend. I believe you have also been invited. Is there any reason that would be a problem? She wrote back, no reason, I'll be there. She was there. So was he. They moved through the room separately, as they had the very first time, at the map exhibition where he had stood beside her and asked about the blank parts, and she had said something about sea monsters, and something had shifted in the architecture of how she understood the afternoon. And then, at some point in the middle of the event, they were standing beside each other, looking at a display of botanical illustrations. And he said quietly, the 4th one from the left. The artist has drawn the roots incorrectly. They go the opposite direction. How do you know how roots go? I spent 3 months at Ashbourne trying to save an orchard that my brother had badly neglected. You learn the roots quickly or you lose the trees. Half of it, he said. The other half was too far gone. She looked at the illustration. At the incorrectly rendered roots. Half seems good. It seemed less good at the time, he said. Now it seems like the half that mattered. She looked at him. He was looking at the illustration, but she knew the conversation was not about the illustration. It hadn't been from the first sentence. Half that mattered, she said. Yes. She looked back at the display around them. The event continued, voices, movement, the polite noise of a city conducting its social business with its usual indifference to individual consequence. I owe you something, she said. He waited. You asked me what I feared marriage would take away, she said, keeping her voice low. I told you everything. I have been thinking since then about whether everything was the honest answer or whether it was the safe one. He was very still. The honest answer, she said, is that I am not afraid of losing the workshop. I am afraid of losing myself. The particular self I have been since my mother died and we came to England, and I had to build a version of me that could survive here without her. She paused. That self is harder than I want it to be sometimes. It keeps people at a distance I don't always want to keep them at. But it has kept me standing, and I have never found a way to trust that love would not require it to go. He turned to look at her. Until recently, she said. I have not found that until recently. The room continued around them. Nobody was watching. Or if they were watching 2 people standing in front of a botanical illustration having a quiet conversation, which was not interesting enough to hold attention long. Lydia, he said. I'm not finished, she said. I need you to hear all of it. All right. I am not good at this, she said. At whatever this is. I know how to manage contracts and negotiate supply chains and read a room for its financial implications. I know how to say no. I have been saying no for 6 years and I have been right every time. She looked at him. I do not know how to say yes to something that frightens me. I have never had occasion to learn. He held her gaze. What frightens you about it? That I will give you something I cannot take back, she said. And that you will handle it the way you handled the debt purchase with excellent intentions and no consultation. She paused. And that even if you do, I will not leave, because by then I will not be able to. The honesty of it landed in the space between them with a weight she had not anticipated. She saw it register in his face not as pressure, not as leverage, but as the thing it was, someone handing over a truth they had been protecting carefully for a very long time. I cannot promise I won't make mistakes, he said. I can promise I won't make the same one. And I can promise that when I feel my instincts reaching for the solution, before I've asked your permission, I will stop. He paused. I cannot always promise that the stopping will be fast. But I can promise that it will happen. Lydia looked at him. That is the most honest thing anyone has offered me, she said. In the entire duration of this London experiment. This London experiment, he said. And the corner of his mouth moved. Is that what this is? It's what it has been, she said. I'm not yet certain what it becomes. He held her gaze with the particular steadiness she had catalogued and relied upon and missed and was now standing in front of a botanical illustration with incorrectly rendered roots. Deeply grateful to be standing next to again. I'm not asking you today, he said. I want to be clear about that, I know. But I want you to know that I intend to, he said. And that the question will be different from the 12 that came before. Not because I am trying to be clever, because I think there is a different question to ask. She studied him. What question? Not yet, he said. When I have it exactly right. She thought about 12 proposals. About what they had all had in common and what they had all been missing. About a man standing in front of a map of sea monsters asking about the blank parts. I'll be waiting, she said. It was the most direct thing she had said to him. She saw him understand that it was not a social pleasantry. It was an answer to a question he hadn't asked yet. They stood there for another moment, in front of the incorrectly rendered roots. In the middle of a room full of people who were not paying attention. And she felt something that had been braced for 6 years ease, slightly, in her chest. Not gone, but no longer entirely alone. Half that mattered, she said again quietly. Yes, he said. Exactly that. The invitation came on a Tuesday. 3 weeks after the botanical exhibition, in an envelope with the Forsyth crest and the particular weight of cardstock that meant the event mattered to someone. Lady Forsyth was hosting a private gathering small by London standards. Perhaps 60 guests to mark the opening of a new charitable lending library she had funded in the East End. The cause was genuine, the guest list was not accidental. Lydia had attended enough of Lady Forsyth's events to understand that the woman arranged her rooms the way a chess player arranged pieces with patience. With intention, and with a clear picture of the endgame that she kept entirely to herself until it had already occurred. Lydia accepted the invitation. She told Maggie while they were going over the week's correspondence, without looking up from the letter she was reading. Maggie said nothing. Then she said, I'll have the blue dress pressed. Then she said nothing again, which was its own kind of comment. The morning of the event, a note arrived from Nathaniel. It was brief. I believe we have both been invited to the Forsyth gathering this evening. I wanted you to know, in case knowing changed your decision about attending. It doesn't change mine. She read it twice. She put it in the drawer where she kept the other letters, the confession letter, the Harland addendum, and now this one, which was different from both of those and somehow more difficult to put down. She wrote back, it doesn't change mine either. I'll see you there. She sealed it before the pause between sending and not sending became long enough to become a decision. The gathering was exactly what Lady Forsyth's gatherings always were: warm, intelligent, and arranged with the kind of care that looked effortless, precisely because so much effort had been spent making it look that way. Lydia arrived at 7 and was immediately claimed by Lady Forsyth herself, which meant she spent the first 20 minutes hearing about the lending library, its collection, its hours, its founding principle that a woman who could read her own contracts was a woman who could protect her own interests, and finding herself genuinely moved by it in a way that surprised her. "You should come and see it," Lady Forsyth said, before the official opening. "I think you'd have things to say about the binding on the periodicals. Several of them are already coming apart at the spine. Send me the worst ones," Lydia said. "I'll have Beatrice look at them, I intend to." Lady Forsyth's gaze moved, briefly and deliberately, to somewhere across the room. "He arrived 10 minutes before you," she said, returning her eyes to Lydia's face with perfect composure. "I placed you on opposite sides of the room because I find that people who have things to say to each other say them better when they've had time to notice the distance first." Lydia looked at her. "You arranged this," Lydia said. "I arranged a gathering in support of a lending library," Lady Forsyth said, with the serenity of someone who has never once in her life been caught doing anything she didn't intend to be caught doing. What anyone chooses to do within it is entirely their own affair. She drifted away to greet another guest. Lydia stood with that for a moment. Then she found a glass of something she didn't particularly want and moved through the room. She did not look for him immediately. She spoke with a solicitor's wife who had interesting things to say about property law in Edinburgh. She spoke with a publisher's representative who had heard about the commercial ledger work Mercer House had done for a client they had in common and wanted to discuss a potential contract. She gave him Beatrice's name and said to send a letter. She was aware of Nathaniel on the other side of the room, the way she had always been aware of him, not by looking, but by the particular change in the quality of the space when he was in it. She had noticed this about herself early and had found it annoying, and had stopped finding it annoying somewhere around the botanical exhibition, and had not yet decided what to call it instead. At 8 o'clock, across a room of 60 people, Nathaniel looked up and found her. He didn't move. He didn't arrange his face into anything deliberate. He simply looked at her, the way he always looked at things that mattered to him, with complete attention, without performance. Lady Forsyth, from across the room, saw this exchange and smiled into her wine. They met in the natural course of the evening, near the bookshelves, because of course they did. Lydia thought, because there were bookshelves in the room, and they were both the kind of people who found themselves near bookshelves at gatherings, whether they intended to or not. "Miss Mercer," he said. "Your Grace," she said. They stood there for a moment with the formality of two people who were using formal address, because the informal version had become something they handled carefully. "The library project is extraordinary," he said. "Have you spoken with Lady Forsyth about it? She wants Beatrice to look at the binding on the periodicals." "Of course she does." Something warm moved in his expression. "How is Beatrice?" "She extended the Callaway contract for 12 months, Lydia said. "She negotiated a better rate than I would have." "I'm not surprised." Lydia looked at him. "She asked about you." He looked up. "Did she?" "She asked whether you had done anything inadvisable recently." "I told her not that I knew of. She said good, and went back to work." The corner of his mouth moved. "High praise from Beatrice." "The highest," Lydia agreed. They stood there for a moment more. Around them, 60 people went on with the evening conversations. Laughter, the clink of glasses, Lady Forsyth moving through the room like a very well-dressed force of nature. "I have the question," Nathaniel said. Lydia went still. He said it quietly, without ceremony, without reaching for her hand or changing his posture, or doing any of the things that 12 men before him had done to create the architecture of a proposal. He simply said it, standing beside her near the bookshelves, the way he said everything that mattered directly, without preamble, having decided it was the right moment and trusting that judgment. "You have the question," she said. "Yes, if you want to hear it." Her heart was doing something she did not entirely have language for. Not the thunderous operatic thing that books described. Something quieter and more profound than that. The feeling of a door she had built very carefully, over very many years, swinging inward. "I want to hear it," she said. He reached into his jacket. What he produced was not a ring. It was a folder, slim, carefully prepared, the same kind of folder he had set on her table all those months ago with the documents about Warren Prescott. The same economy of presentation, the same refusal to make the container more important than the contents. He held it out. Inside was a document, several pages, legal in structure, prepared by what appeared to be two solicitors working in coordination. She recognized Harlan's formatting on the second page. The other firm she did not know, but the letterhead indicated Ashbourne's estate solicitors. She read it. She read it carefully, the way she read everything that mattered. The room continued around her. He waited. He was extraordinarily good at waiting. The document was a marriage settlement and partnership arrangement. Not a modern one, not a fiction that pretended the law was something it wasn't. It was built from the actual structures available. Trusts, settlements, property arrangements, commercial partnership clauses. It was intricate, and it was clearly the product of several weeks of sustained legal effort, and it had been constructed with a single apparent purpose: to protect within every mechanism the law actually permitted. The structures she had already built. Mercer House was named specifically. Its trust arrangement, the one Nathaniel had transferred into Beatrice's control, was affirmed and documented as independent of any marital arrangement. Her personal assets were structured with Harlan as independent trustee. Her right to conduct commercial activities in her own name was explicitly preserved within the document's terms. It was not perfect. She could see the places where the law simply did not allow for what would have been fair. But it was as close to honest as the legal architecture of 1819 could be made to come. She looked up from the last page. He was watching her with the expression she had come to trust above almost any other, not anxious, not performing patience, just present, just waiting to see what she would do with what she'd been given. "Harlan didn't tell me he was working on this," she said. "I asked him not to," Nathaniel said. "I wanted you to see it complete. Not draft by draft, I thought." He paused. "I thought if you saw it in pieces, you might spend the interim negotiating terms in your head rather than deciding whether you wanted to negotiate at all." She looked at him. "That is a very specific understanding of how I think." "I have been paying attention," he said. Around them, Lydia became aware that the room had shifted slightly. Not dramatically, no one had stopped what they were doing. No one had turned to stare, but in the particular way that a social room registers something happening at its edge. Several conversations had become slightly quieter, and several people had become slightly more attentive to the middle distance near the bookshelves. She recognized some of those faces, the solicitor's wife she had spoken to earlier. 3 women who had been at the ball the night Henry Wycliffe proposed, all those months ago, and had whispered about 12 refusals and female empires and dying alone among paper and ink. London was watching, it always watched. Lydia looked at the document in her hands. Then she looked at Nathaniel. "You said you had a question," she said. "This is a document. The document is the preamble," he said. "The question is different." She waited. He looked at her not with the rehearsed intensity of a man who has prepared a speech, but with the clear, direct, somewhat undefended expression of someone who has decided that the only way to say a thing correctly is to say it simply. "I asked you once what you were afraid marriage would take away," he said. "You told me. I did not handle your answer as carefully as I should have. And I will not pretend otherwise." He paused. "The question I have now is different. It is not about what either of us loses." He held her gaze. "What would we have to build so that neither of us disappears inside it?" The room was very quiet. Or perhaps it was just that everything else became distant. The way everything else becomes distant when a thing you have been waiting for, without knowing you were waiting for it, finally arrives. "That is a different question," she said. "Yes. Most men ask what they can give me," she said. Or what I should want, I know. You are asking what we build together. Yes, he said. Because I am not interested in giving you a life. I am interested in building one alongside yours, if you will permit it. He paused. And because I have learned at some cost that permission is not a formality. It is the whole foundation. Lydia stood with the folder in her hands and looked at this man who had arrived in her life with documents and practical questions, and the rare, valuable quality of knowing when to stop talking, and she thought about 12 proposals and what they had all been missing and why this one was not missing it. Then she looked around the room, the faces watching her. The solicitor's wife, the 3 women from the Forsyth ball. Lady Forsyth herself near the window, not pretending not to watch. A man near the door she recognized as having told someone, on the night of the 12th refusal, that Lydia Mercer would end her days surrounded by paper and ink. She looked back at Nathaniel. I have conditions, she said. Something in his face shifted, not surprise, but the specific recognition of a man who has been told exactly what he hoped to hear. I would be disappointed if you didn't. She opened the folder again to the second page. This clause, the advisory provision, it gives me consultative status on selected Ashbourne estate matters. I want it changed. Changed how? Not consultative, she said. Substantive, if I am to advise on estate finance. I advise as a participant, not as a guest. She kept her voice entirely level. I am not decorative expertise, if you want my knowledge. You engage it properly. He looked at her for a moment. Then agreed. Mercer House, she said. I continue to operate it. You have no ownership stake, no governance role, no vote. That was already in the document. I want to say it aloud, she said. So there is no version of this conversation in which it was implied rather than stated. Understood, he said. Mercer House is yours. It was yours before me, and it will be yours alongside me, and that is not a concession. It is simply true. She looked at him. She believed him. That was the thing. She was still getting used to the fact that believing him had started to feel like the natural response rather than the suspicious one. Where do we live, she said. You tell me, he said immediately. London is necessary for your work. Ashbourne needs someone competent in it periodically. Which I have been badly managing alone. Both seems reasonable. The specifics are a conversation we have together. Before decisions are made, he held her gaze. Before decisions are made, the room was watching. She was aware of it in the peripheral way that she had become aware of many things over the years of London seasons, the social machinery turning. The arithmetic of observation and inference and reputation operating in real time around them. She had spent 6 years maneuvering within that machinery. She was not afraid of it. One more condition, she said. Name it. She looked at him steadily. When you are drowning, and you will be. Because that is what estate obligations and family complexity and life in general produce. Periodically, you decide to drown nobly and alone. Before you make the decision. She paused. Not after. Before. He went very still. She watched him understand that this was not a procedural requirement. It was the answer to a much deeper question. The question of whether this man, who had spent his adult life being the person who absorbed difficulty without complaint and solved problems without consultation, could learn to share the weight before it crushed him. Yes, he said. It was entirely serious. Yes, I will. And when I am drowning, she said, and she paused. Because the next words were the ones she had never said. Because the old version of herself would have said, I don't drown, and meant it, and been only half wrong and entirely alone, I will tell you. He looked at her. She saw it land. She saw him understand that those 3 words were the most significant thing she had said in the entire conversation. Not because they were dramatic, because they were true. And true in a way they would not have been 6 months ago. And both of them knew it. Yes, she said. He blinked. I haven't asked yet. You've been asking, she said. Since the night you stood beside a map of sea monsters and asked what I was actually thinking about. This is just the version with a document attached. She looked at the folder one more time, then closed it. With the conditions. With the conditions, he agreed. All of them. Every single one, he said. Somewhere across the room, Lady Forsyth set down her wineglass with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has arranged 60 guests, a lending library, and the culmination of a 6-month social education, and found the evening entirely worth the effort. The solicitor's wife said something to the woman beside her. The 3 women from the Forsyth ball exchanged glances that were not what they would have been a year ago, not contempt, not pity, not the particular satisfaction of watching someone arrive at what they had predicted. Something more complicated than that. The look of people watching something they had not expected, and finding themselves moved by it without entirely understanding why. The man near the door who had predicted paper, ink, and solitude said nothing. He looked at his glass. Lydia was not watching any of them. She was looking at Nathaniel Caldwell, who was looking at her with the expression she had come to know better than almost any other, clear, direct, undefended, and she thought about 12 proposals, and what they had all contained, and what this one did not contain, and why that made all the difference. None of the 12 had asked what she was building. They had asked what she wanted to receive. There was a difference. And the difference was the entire story. "I'm going to shake your hand," he said, "because we are in a room full of people, and I believe we have already given them sufficient material for the week." She almost laughed. "Shake my hand." He did. His hand was warm, and the handshake was brief and entirely correct for a public setting, and also, she thought, the most significant handshake she had ever been party to. "I'll call on you tomorrow," he said. "In the morning. We should go over the document with both solicitors present before anything is filed." 9 o'clock, she said. 9 o'clock, he agreed. He released her hand. He inclined his head, not a performance. Just courtesy, the natural grammar of the world they both inhabited. Then he walked away across the room toward Lady Forsyth, who received him with an expression of serene innocence that fooled absolutely no one. Lydia stood beside the bookshelves, with the folder in her hands and the evening continuing around her, and felt, for the first time in longer than she could accurately calculate, that the future was not a thing she was bracing for. 3 years later, Mercer House had 2 floors where it had once had 1. Not because Lydia had decided to build an empire, because the work had expanded in the way that good work expands incrementally. Because it was needed, because the quality was there, and the need was there, and Beatrice had argued, correctly, that turning away work they could handle was a failure of a different kind. Beatrice ran the London operation. She had 2 supervisors now, both women who had started at the presses and grown into something more, and a quarterly contract with a publishing house that had discovered Mercer House's work on the school primers and decided that quality, at a fair price, was preferable to the alternative. 3 of the original women were still there. Helen had become the production supervisor and ran the press room with the same focused competence she brought to everything, and had trained 4 others in the past 2 years who brought their own intelligence to the work. The woman who had arrived 4 years ago with 2 children and a vanished husband had a different life now. She had learned bookkeeping at the workshop, earned a wage for 3 years, and recently opened a small accounting practice serving women in the commercial district who needed someone who understood their situations from the inside. She sent Lydia a letter on the anniversary of her first day at Mercer House every year. Lydia kept everyone. At Ashbourne, things were different from what they had been. Not transformed, Lydia had learned to distrust transformations, which were usually performances. Changed. In the incremental and sometimes difficult way that real things change when 2 people with strong opinions and genuine respect for each other occupy the same space and try to build something neither could build alone. They argued. That was the thing people who had watched them from the outside sometimes found surprising, the frequency and vigor with which they disagreed. About estate finances, about the approach to a difficult tenant situation, about a decision involving his sister's inheritance that Lydia thought he had handled correctly, and he thought he had handled slightly wrong. and they spent 2 evenings establishing who was right, which turned out to be both of them, in different respects. Which was the answer to most of their arguments. His sister had come to Lydia 6 months into the marriage with a proposal of her own, a small commercial venture she wanted to fund from her restructured inheritance, and a request for advice from someone who had actually run one. Lydia had spent 4 hours with her going over the structure. The venture was now in its 2nd year and breaking even, which his sister described as the most satisfying thing that had ever happened to her. Nathaniel had learned to ask before he decided. Not perfectly, there were still moments when his instincts moved faster than his understanding, when she saw him catch himself mid-reach and redirect. But he caught himself. That was the thing she had come to trust most deeply. Not that he never made the mistake, but that he recognized it before it landed. She had learned to tell him when she was drowning before she had solved the problem. That was harder than she had expected it to be. Not because she didn't trust him, she did. In the complete and examined way, she trusted very few things. But because the habit of carrying things alone was 20 years old and the new habit was 3, and old habits did not yield easily even when you wanted them to. One evening in November, in the 3rd year, she was at the desk in the study they had made into a shared working space, his papers on one side, hers on the other, a system that had evolved without discussion into something that worked, because it was honest about the fact that they were 2 people with 2 sets of work who happened to occupy the same life. She was reading a letter from Harland. A complication with the Mercer house lease. The landlord had died, and the estate was being administered by an heir who had not yet confirmed the existing terms. Not a crisis, but a pressure that required attention and would require more attention before it was resolved. She read it twice. She set it down. On the other side of the desk, Nathaniel was working through estate accounts with the focused attention of a man who had learned to find that satisfaction in the numbers themselves rather than only in the conclusions they produced. She picked the letter up again. Old instinct. Put it in the drawer. Solve it first. Tell him when there was something to tell that wasn't just a problem. She put it down. She looked at him. Nathaniel. He looked up. She slid the letter across the desk. He read it. She watched his face, not for rescue, not for the solution arriving before she had asked for one, but for the particular quality of attention she had come to know as his. Complete, precise, and then waiting. He finished reading. He set the letter down. How much time do we have before it becomes urgent, he said. Not, I'll handle it. Not, let me make some calls. What's your timeline? What do you need? Let me help you think. 6 weeks before the heir needs to confirm or renegotiate, she said. Harlan thinks 4 if we want a comfortable margin. Do you want me to ask around about the heir? I may know someone who knows the estate solicitor. Yes, she said. That would be useful. He reached for his own notepad and wrote something down. She looked at him, at the familiar shape of him across the desk, at the way 3 years had settled into something she hadn't had language for, when she stood beside a sea monster map and couldn't stop thinking about a man who asked about the blank parts. Nathaniel, he looked up again. Thank you, she said. For asking instead of deciding. He held her gaze for a moment. Something moved in his expression that was quieter than happiness and more durable. Thank you, he said, for sliding the letter across. She picked up her pen. He went back to his accounts. The study was quiet around them. The good quiet of 2 people working side by side. And outside London did what it always did, and the presses at Mercer House ran their steady rhythm. And somewhere across the city, the women who had come to a workshop because they had nowhere else to go were living lives that were different from what they would otherwise have been. And all of this was what Lydia Mercer had spent 6 years refusing 12 proposals to protect. Not because she was waiting for a better title, not because she was waiting for more money or a larger estate or a man whose feelings she could not imagine doubting. She had been building something, and she had been right to protect it. What she had not known, what she could not have known, Before a man stood beside a map of sea monsters and asked the one question no one had thought to ask was that protecting it and sharing it were not the same operation, and that the right person did not ask you to choose. They asked what the two of you might build if both were allowed to remain whole. That was the question. It had always been the question. She had simply needed someone to finally ask it.